Hey guys, it's DJ Chicken Tender coming to you live. So since I'm not there today, I thought that I would give you notes in this manner, right? So as I go through the PowerPoint, feel free to pause it if you need extra time to write stuff down, but take notes just like you regularly would. So today we're starting a new unit, and that new unit is based on new ideas and discovery. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the Renaissance. And you hopefully have heard of the Renaissance before. This is just going to get a little bit more in detail. So let's see, what was the Renaissance actually? Okay, we see a map there. Hopefully we know that that's Italy, right? So the word Renaissance actually means rebirth. And that's because the idea of, art and culture and literature and all that stuff is being reborn. Europe has just come through the Middle Ages, otherwise known as the Dark Ages, right? Besides Charlemagne, promoting education, there wasn't really a lot of literacy and fine arts going around. And we're also recovering from the plague, remember, which was really nasty. Fleas on rats, fleas on rats. So Europe's kind of reinventing itself at this point. We're rebirthing the culture that's going to exist in Europe. Another effect of the plague and the Crusades and all that great stuff is Europeans questioning their faith, right? So keep that in your minds as well, because that's going to continue to come up throughout this unit, the weakening of the church power. So because people are losing faith in the church, they're beginning to put more faith in actual individuals, actual human beings. And that sounds really obvious to us now, but that's something that's new at this time. The idea that the viewpoint you should have on the world is not, religious. Instead, it's the word secular. And that's that word right there towards the bottom, secular. That's people moving away from church life and instead focusing on the here and now, the actual physical world that you live in. Focusing more on the actual life you live instead of being obsessed only with the afterlife. So secular, the actual here and now, the world without religion. Another thing we're recovering from are the Crusades, right? And the Crusades, killed a lot of people. It led to more tension and stuff. But it did have some positive effects, and one of those is going to be an increase in trade. And now that the Europeans are aware of all the cool, awesome stuff that the Middle East has to offer trade-wise, trade's going to go up, and the demand for those products is going to skyrocket as well. Also, remember when we were talking about Islamic advancements, banking systems and checks are going to be one of those things as well. So credit and banking is going to grow in Europe as well, which means that people are able to afford super expensive things. So where is the Renaissance actually occurring, right? What you'll see on this map as they begin to populate are the major northern cities of Italy. Milan, Genoa, Venice, and Florence. These are the major Italian cities where the Renaissance is going to flourish. And the reason for that is because art is expensive. It's expensive to, make your living as an artist. Stuff you sell needs to be expensive. And because of that, only expensive people are going to be able to buy your work, which means that obviously in the wealthy cities, that's where this whole creating art thing is going to begin, because that's where people can afford to buy it, right? And there's also major trade ports, right, filtering into the Mediterranean Sea. So northern Italian cities, Venice, Milan, and Florence is where the Renaissance is going to begin. So Italians have lots of money, and they spend that money on art. It's important to know, art's expensive, right? Real art. I could pay Marcus a nickel to draw me a picture of a wolf or something like that, right? But if I want an established artist to draw me something, it might cost a little bit more, right? But if I did that and I purchased a lot more money from a lot of, established wealthy artists, then I'm going to be elevated in my status, right? The more art you own, the more sophisticated and hoity-toity you appear to be, which is why people called patrons are going to pay artists. Patrons are people who buy art from artists. They're the reason the Renaissance happens, because without people spending money on art, there'd be no reason to create art, and the Renaissance would have never happened. Cool. Alright, this guy. Really, really cool. Niccolo Machiavelli. You say his name, Machiavelli. And Machiavelli is going to write a very famous work of the Renaissance called The Prince. And Machiavelli in The Prince is going to state Basically, you can read the exact quote right there. But the idea that it's better to be feared than loved, right? The ruler should be able to do whatever it takes to maintain control over his people. And he shouldn't let things like guilt kind of weigh him down, right? He should do whatever it takes to stay in power. Let's see, and here's the better little jot down to get. It's better for a ruler to be feared than loved, right? As long as he's feared, he's being respected, he's being listened to. If he's loved, it's easy to kind of, take advantage of that. Of course, he also believes they should be quick and decisive, keep power by any means. So that means by manipulating the people, taking advantage of the people, raising taxes, making people angry. And the gist of the prince, besides being feared and loved, you can boil it all down to the end justifies the mean. He's basically saying that whatever you have to do, as long as it keeps you in power, is justified. All right, so a super interesting viewpoint taking hold here that a lot of absolute monarchs are going to kind of glob onto in the next unit. All right, cool. So some new ideas that are going on in the Renaissance. There's a few. So we already talked about what it means to be secular. So secularism makes sense. It's the focus on worldly themes instead of religious. This is important because this is a major theme we see in the Renaissance, focusing on the secular world and not the religious world. But we also see an emphasis on individualism. And individualism is exactly what it seems like. It's an emphasis on the individual. So instead of painting large groups or religious figures, instead we're focusing on actual people, right? And we're painting them how they truly look. We're not, making them look better than they are. We're not, giving them extra volume in their hair or taking 10 pounds off. If they look like what they look like, that's how we're painting them. And individual people begin to become, the focus of actual art. Humanism is kind of the basis of individualism, and it's talking about the actual, individual. We're looking at humans for the first time. We're studying them. We're using them in art because, once again, this is a secular mindset, right? So we're actually studying the human. So humanism, individualism, they're very, very similar. For the most part, we can basically use them interchangeably, but individualism is kind of a step further than humanism, right? So at first we were looking at just religious people. Now we've moved towards secularism. We're looking at worldly things. Then we go to humanism. Let's focus on humans. Then we take it one step further and say, let's look at individual people themselves. Let's study them, and create them in art. All right? Another important difference in the Renaissance compared to where we were before, art in the Middle Ages was all about religion, right? Remember all the ugly babies and stuff like that? It was all about being saved, right? Because life sucked so bad, people couldn't wait to go to the afterlife. And there's an example of that, right? There's Jesus. In the Renaissance, however, like I just said, it's a lot more humanism, a lot more individual. We're looking at worldly matters. But of course there is some Christianity, right? If you see a picture, and I ask you, is this, medieval art or Renaissance art? Just because it's religious, that doesn't instantly make it medieval, right? If it looks more realistic, if the focus is on the actual humans, if the baby looks proportional and kind of normal, it's probably Renaissance. And there's a good example right there in a lower right-hand screen, right? There's Mary and I'm assuming it's Mary and baby Jesus. It might just be a woman and a baby, which focuses in on humanism, right? We don't really know. All right, let's talk about some major people of the Renaissance. Michelangelo, of course, one of the most well-rounded Renaissance mans of his time, right? He was an artist. He did a lot. Mostly painting and sculpting is what he's most known for. He's going to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which is this really pretty church we'll look at in just a second. And he's going to sculpt a very famous statue called David. All right, so go ahead and get that down. Let's move ahead. Here's David, right? Realistic, but also kind of the ideal physique. So that's cool. Dun, dun, dun. There's your date right there, 1504. Do you need to memorize that? No, it's just cool. Here's the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Now, y'all, he built this on scaffolding, which are like those things you see outside of buildings that people are working on, right? It's like outside staircases and stuff. And he was ancient when he was painting this. He was in his like 70s. Think of a 70-year-old, and think about them scampering up and down a ladder all day, painting stuff right above his head, right? It's very impressive that this was done. The ceiling is a fresco, which is a type of art that develops in the Renaissance, where they're actually painting on the wet ceiling so that way the paint actually molds into the plastic, which is very, very fascinating. Cool. Oh, there you go. The fresco word for you right there. And this wall you see right ahead of you in this picture, see the ceiling is painted and stuff, the walls are painted, but that one wall we're looking at with that kind of blue background is the Last Judgment. And that's kind of the most famous piece of this entire artwork, right? So in just this wall, we see the creation of Eve, right? There's Eve, who's probably pleading to not be kicked out after, tasting the apple. There's a creation of Adam. What else? A separation from light and darkness. Cool. Some art themes in there. The Last Judgment. He's being judged before he, dies. So there's the painting as a whole. But just look at the detail, right? This is, the skin that he lived in, right? It's very, very detailed. So even though it's this enormous thing, there's lots of detail. It's one of the greatest works of art of all time. Alright, also some other sculptures and stuff that he did. That's cool. There you go, some more. Alright, getting, just rolling along, y'all. Alright, Leonardo da Vinci. Hopefully we've heard of him, or Leonardo from, the Turtles. But anyway, Leonardo da Vinci, a true Renaissance man, someone who's well-rounded, someone who does everything the Renaissance people are doing. He's an artist, he's a scientist, he's an inventor, right? A lot of the sketches you see along the top right here are all his. His most famous works are the Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa's interesting. I'll talk more about that with you on Monday. Hopefully we've seen this before, right? Reproduced in many, 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 many ways. But an important part about the Mona Lisa and also the Last Supper we'll look at in just a second is this triangle perspective. And it kind of draws your eye naturally to her face, right? You just look at this picture and without training or without thinking about it, naturally your eye goes to her face. And you could kind of say, well, that's kind of natural. She's a person. Obviously, I'm going to look at her face. But the way she's sitting at this kind of half tilt, which is new for this time, the way that her entire body kind of forms a triangle, it naturally forces your eyes to look at her face, which is kind of creepy, right? You're being manipulated with, witchcraft to look at things, but many, many reproductions of this, right? Andy Warhol's a very famous American artist much later on. He's going to create, parodies of the Mona Lisa. There's also this conspiracy that the Mona Lisa is basically the girl version of Da Vinci. Was he so egotistical that he just painted a picture of himself? Maybe. Here's the Last Supper. Once again, we're going to use perspective. Oh, that's a lot of perspective. Right, horizontal, vertical, you can tell who's closer and who's farther away from the center. And once again, just like with the Mona Lisa, we're going to use that triangle perspective, right? You naturally look at Jesus in the middle. It's not saying that you can't look at other things. Your eye is just naturally drawn to him, right? And it kind of isolates him there from the rest of the painting. So you know that Jesus is the important part of that. Here we see some sketches and stuff. He was, a true visionary, way ahead of his time, invented a ton of stuff. Raphael, he was a painter. Here's a famous painting he did called The School of Athens. These are kind of cool details, but, whatever. Also, Raphael, very famous for perspective, the idea of painting things in the distance smaller than things that are at the front of the painting. This is simple to us nowadays. You probably learned this in art class in 3rd grade, that things in the background are smaller. But back then, this is an entirely new concept. Alright, so that's it for the Renaissance today. And when I come back on Monday, we will start with the Northern Renaissance. Alright, I miss you guys so much. I will see you Monday. Bye.